First, we're going to be finding or creating, or I'll cover finding or creating custom shapes. Next, we'll be importing custom shapes into Tableau Public. So in the first step, now that we actually have shapes we want to use, how do we actually get those to work in Tableau Public to where we can build some custom charts? And three is doing just that, is building what are some simple charts that I can make using custom shapes. And number four would be taking that a step further and what are some a little more advanced charts I can build. And the an example I'll show today is specifically a dual axis chart. And five is using custom shapes as filters. Some of you may have seen this across Tableau Public where as opposed to using a text field or even just a circle or a square mark, people actually use a custom shape that a symbol or an icon probably resonates with someone quicker than reading out a text field. So that's a great use for using custom shapes as filters that I'll also cover today. So this is the folder that I mentioned before. If you can I'm on a Mac, so it would be in my Finder and then into my documents. But if you're on PC, this would be the directory that you need to locate where we're going to be saving our shapes to. So I will actually show that. So here I am in my documents. You can see this folder called My Tableau Repository. That should show up as right after you download Tableau Desktop or Tableau Public. This folder should exist in your Documents folder. And you can see when I drop down that arrow, there's a bunch of different subfolders within that. But the one that we're going to focus on is specifically shapes. And you can see you may see some of these folder names a little weird and not necessarily what the standard is, but those are just some of the custom shapes that I've created over the years. So that's just a quick glimpse of where we'll be working today. So finding or creating custom shapes. Let me show you an example. So the data we're going to be working with today is in the spirit of the Winter Games that is just starting. We're going to be working with some Olympics data. So I'm going to drop this link into the chat box. So in the chat box, is the link to the page that I'm viewing right now. But this is just a website I found that I can quickly download a lot of different flag icons. So the viz I'm interested in building today would be I want to look at the medal count for each country historically. So when I go to this website, I can just click and download each of these icons as a PNG. And then to also show you the data we're going to be working with today. It's the Summer Olympics medalist data set. I know it's the Summer Olympics and right now we're in the Winter Olympics, but I'll also drop this link in the chat box. Please know that the link that I'm sending in the chat box will kick off a download of an Excel file, just so you aren't, it's not alarming like, whoa, what's downloading right now. So yeah, when you click that link, it'll download an Excel file, and that's the data we'll be working with today. So that probably makes more sense as to why we're looking at country flags. So we can download each of these. I went ahead and did that and downloaded quite a few. There's a lot more in here than I'm showing today, but I just want to give you an example of how this can be done. So I've just created this folder of a bunch of different flags in my downloads and I just called it flags from the web. So you can see these are actually the images from the website we were just looking at. So what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to drag flags from the web into my documents. And now when I go to documents, there's that flags from the web folder. I want to drag that into the shapes folder. So now there should be a folder just called flags from the web. So now we're set up to actually use custom shapes in Tableau. So now I'm going to make a new Tableau Public workbook. And then for the data, we're going to connect to that Excel file, or the Excel file I just sent in the chat box, which is the Summer Olympic medalist data on Tableau Public website. And the table we'll be using is called All Medalists. So now when I go to sheet 1 and I start when I want to make a viz, like let's say I want to do or actually we'll get into the chart building in just a moment. What I want to back up and show you a way to get these or similar custom shapes a slightly a different way. And that's with this shape extractor that was created, and I've also talked about this tool in another live training that I've hosted. It's pretty awesome. The only requirement is that you need to use Google Chrome as your browser. But all you do is drag and drop this extract custom shapes bookmarklet into your bookmarks bar. And you can see I already have that here. But all you have to do is go to see a viz that you like on Tableau Public that maybe it has like custom shapes that you want, but you don't really know necessarily where the author got those shapes from, but you want to use them in your viz. Or maybe this would be a lot, in our case, this would be a lot easier way than hand or manually downloading each and every one of these flags. Um, so all you have to do is be viewing a viz like this, and then click on the bookmark that says Extract Custom Shapes, and you'll see in my downloads what just appeared is the zip file of all the shapes that I used in that viz. So I happen to author this workbook, so I know it's in here. But this is just to show you this can be any viz using custom shapes, where I can quickly download all of the custom shapes there, and then same exact process that we just followed earlier. Drag and drop this flags folder into documents, and then from documents into shapes of my Tableau repository. I can replace that. Cool. So now we go over to Tableau Public. We covered finding or creating custom shapes. That finding what custom shapes is what we did, and I showed you a web page that oh, a link to the bookmark. Sure thing. Sorry, I kind of flew through that. Thanks for stopping me. So yeah, I just in the chat box also just dropped a link for this shape extractor. So kind of recapping what we just did, finding or creating custom shapes, we found a website that had all of the different icons that we wanted to use, and we can download each of those as PNG files, put them into a folder, and drag that folder into the My Tableau repository shapes folder. And then the next step was importing custom shapes into Tableau Public. That would actually be what we're about to cover now. Yeah, and then we'll build some charts. Cool. So importing custom shapes. So we already did most of the work as far as getting your shapes ready to actually use. Now let's actually start using them. So for just a simple chart, I just want to drag this field called NOC. You can see in the data source that's just like a country abbreviation. So for me, it's easier to understand that if I just rename it country. So now I'm just going to drag and drop country on rows. I'm going to change this to shape. I'm also going to drag country onto the shape mark card or the shape card And then when I go, now these are just kind of like the default shapes from Tableau. I want to actually use those flags that we just downloaded. So I click on shape. Instead of using the default, I click the drop down. And you can see right now that both the flags that I extracted from my LinkedIn Tableau Public workbook are there, as well as the flags that we downloaded from the web. If they don't appear, don't panic. Just hit reload shapes, and all that's doing is kind of like refreshing your the shapes that should appear in the list. And for right now, I'm gonna use the flags that I downloaded from my previous workbook. And granted, there are a lot more countries in this data set than there are shapes to work with. So I just want to show a few examples, and I think that'll be a great way of also showing a before and after of what using custom shapes can do. So I'm going to put assign the US flag. I see that's Brazil, France. Oh, there's Canada. France, Germany, Great Britain. Okay. I think that's enough to work with right now. But you can see, oh, there's Brazil, and there's the flag right next to it instead of these default shapes. And this looks really tiny on my screen, so I'm just going to bump up the size. And it looks a little weird having these default shapes in the way, but if it were just flags that we were working with, then it'd be a lot easier, or it'd be a lot easier to see um, bumping up the size. So that's the process as far as going from just using default shapes to finding the shapes that you want to use in your viz, and then actually loading those into Tableau Public to use on your vizzes. So now let's build some charts. So right now we're on the using custom shapes on simple charts. I'm going to rename this sheet. Now I just want to all I want to know now is I want to make a scatter plot where the x-axis would be the number of a distinct count of athletes. So you can see in the data set, each one of these rows is a different athlete that medaled, and then it has the country that they competed for within that same record. So I just want a distinct count of how many athletes have participated for a certain or have medaled for a certain country. So to do that, I'm going to drag athlete onto rows, add all members, and then I want to convert this from a dimension, what it is right now, into a distinct count. So I hit the drop down arrow, hover over measure, count distinct. So this tells me that there were in this data set, there are 21,413 unique athletes in this data set. So each row is a medal. Like, so if basically if I just did a number of records for each country, that would tell me how many medals did each country win in this data set. So in the same sheet, I'm just going to use number of records, and I'm going to leave that as is, some number of records. So right now this tells me that this dot here would tell me that there were just over 21,000 distinct athletes, and that there were 29,216 medals awarded in the data set. But I want to get a little more granular. I want to drag country onto shape. And if this wasn't shape, if the automatic didn't show shape, all you would have to do, like let's say if it happened to be a bar chart, for example, or maybe a circle, all you have to do is use the drop down select shape, and then drag and drop country onto shape. And now, because we used country in this previous sheet, you can see uh, those same shapes appear in this scatter plot. And I can bump up the size to make it a little easier to read. But you can like I was the first time I started using custom shapes, that was pretty fascinating to me that I didn't have to do any extra work to reassign what those shapes were. So I'm going to name this just scatter plot. So this is just a really simple chart type now where I can hover over any country and I can see, for example, for France, there were 981 athletes that won 1,314 medals. And with the new Vision tooltip, you can even create a bar chart on hover that can show you a breakdown of the different between gold, silver, bronze. So next would be creating a little more of an advanced chart type using dual axis. So some of you may have worked with lollipop charts before. So I'm going to show you a quick example. If I had country on rows and I just did number of records to give me kind of a quick medal count in the data set. And then maybe you've done a dual axis. So all I'm going to do is drag some number of records back onto columns, create a dual axis. Now, so I'm going to do that again in case any of you have not worked with a dual axis chart before. So I have, in this example, I'll be using the same field. So these are both just some number of records. And on the second pill, I'm going to hit the drop down arrow, click on dual axis, and then I'm right clicking on uh, the axis itself, and I just want to make sure they're synchronized, which is important if you're working with data or fields that are not exactly the same. Okay, so one of these I want to convert to a bar chart, and I want to keep the other as a circle. And I want to bump up the size of the circles, and actually want to change the color of the bars to light blue. So that's a really quick example of what I refer to as a lollipop chart, and I can even change the size of the bars, make them narrow. Um, so in this example, or I guess in today's training of using custom shapes, why don't we swap out each of these circles and actually use a country flag of some sort. So I'm going to drag and to replace the circles, I'm going to change it to shape and add country onto shape. And right now it's automatically assigning the same shapes as before. And know that when I go in and let's say I want to use the custom shapes that we downloaded manually from the web instead of using the shape extractor. If I go in and reassign to these flags, know that that will be reflected in the other viz. So you could create a new field, almost like a dummy field, that you can assign shapes to. If that's a little confusing, I'm happy to answer questions about that in the end. But and that's a good reminder, if you have any questions along the way, I know I'm running through this fast. We're going to have time for Q&A at the end. But you can also drop your questions into the chat box, and if I don't cover them right away, I will address them at the end. So so all I want to do is I don't like the way these rectangular flags look on the end of the bar chart. So I'm just going to switch over to our manually downloaded ones. So I see Canada, Brazil, I think that's just a few examples. There's Japan. So I'm just going to do a few as an example. So just within this view, you can see kind of the progression from using uh, just the default shapes to using the extracted shapes and then changing that to the other manually downloaded shapes that we use. And personally, I like this look a little better. It looks a little cleaner using the circles at the end of the bar charts. So I'm happy with where this dual axis chart is. So just a quick review. We assign custom shapes, and and you can see that I changed Canada and Brazil. That's reflected in this first sheet that we made. So just a quick review. We made the table of flags, assigning a custom shape to each country. We continued that into building a scatter plot for doing medal counts and count of athletes for each country. And then we did kind of an overall medal count here. So the next thing we wanted to cover is using custom shapes as filters. So now I want to build, actually we can probably just use the first sheet we made. So all I want to do is remove country from rows, and that's going to create this, it's just going to put all of the marks for each country up there, and then the ones that we've assigned to, you can see that reflected. So I'm just going to change the name of this. I'll leave it a table of flags. So now when I create a dashboard, let's say up top I wanted the table of all the different like countries to choose from. And then on the bottom I had a scatter plot and my lollipop chart. Again, I'm going through this fast, I know. So now with the latest version of Tableau, I'm just going to click on the table of flags sheet. And when I click on it, there's this use as filter button. It just looks like a funnel. So when I click on that, it will filter the other sheets that are using the same data source for me. So you can see instead of using what maybe a drop-down menu that you could have been using, or I mean you still could use, but this is an engaging way of selecting a country's flag, and then immediately it shows that result in the other sheets that you've built. So that's how you can use custom shapes as a filter. I do want to call out I know I flew through this and I want to call out some other great resources of different tips that I did not mention. I'll put that on screen and then I'll also drop it in the chat box. Jeffrey Schaefer has a pretty nice blog post talking through what are some formatting considerations when using custom shapes. So one thing I didn't talk about today is making sure that you use actually, I'll just put the blog post on screen real quick. So something I did talk about using the shape extractor. One thing I didn't cover was using shapes that have transparent backgrounds. So you can see when you're using a non-white background and you have a shape or an image that has a background to it, it can create a kind of a border around the shape. And if you don't want that, you just delete the background of the image itself, so that when Tableau is reading in each of the shapes you're using, it's transparent and clean. But you can use this blog post and read it. I'd highly recommend reading it. It's got a lot of cool tips. Another one is how you can use a custom shape as a help icon. So when people hover, they can learn more about your methodology. They can find out how to read the viz, anything. So yeah, that I would recommend checking this out when you can. Cool. So with that, again, thank you all for joining this live training. I'm going to put my Twitter handle back on screen. Yeah, so feel free to follow me and message me on Twitter. Thanks, and look out for our next live trainings.